There is one game we all play, and that game is called real life. Not everyone is good at it, but some of us are. Real life is an open world game with endless possibilities. And after all, only the uncultured spend their day-to-day life in just one country. So join me in my life of leisure as I explore the best games for the handheld around the world. Greetings! I am currently in Williamsburg in Virginia, formerly one of the 13 British colonies. I look around me and not a lot has really changed around here since the war. I feel like I've fallen into a game of Assassin's Creed 3! I bloody hate Assassin's Creed 3. I hate it almost as much as I hate all those bloody treacherous bastards who turned on Great Britain and stole our land. Right, so now I am here in the New World. It's time to make America a colony again. Yeah. Only joking. Could you imagine the maintenance costs on a place this size? My garden's big enough, thank you. I am just here to see the sights and review handhelds from around the world. Today we go back and revisit the Game Gear once more. However, this time we're going to look at one of the games within the system's library. In one of my previous episodes, I reviewed Panzer Dragoon Saga, one of the best and most sought after games on the entire Sega Saturn system. Panzer Dragoon Saga is a JRPG and one of the 3 Panzer Dragoon games on the system. The other 2 games are on-rail shooters, gameplay wise similar to the Star Fox games. All 3 of these games are now cult classics and some of the first games most people would think of when talking about the Saturn. Whilst most people have heard of these games, I very much doubt many people have heard of Panzer Dragoon Mini, an entry to the Panzer Dragoon series that was exclusive to the Sega Game Gear. This game was released in '96 and only in Japan. That is weird to think about as well. In the Sega Saturn era, Sega was still regularly churning out Game Gear games. In 1996 in my household, the Sega Game Gear was long forgotten. Anyway, while Saturn owners were playing amazing 3D on-rail shooter Panzer Dragoon games, Game Gear owners were offered a more minimalistic game. Panzer Dragoon Mini plays close to the Sega arcade game Space Harrier than it does its Saturn counterparts. The game, however, still has a lock-on feature, and for the first and only time in the series' history, the Dragon doesn't have a rider. One would suspect all these changes were solely put in place due to the system's limitations. Let's talk gameplay. You start the game out by choosing whether to play the game on easy, normal or hard setting and get to choose which dragon to play as. As mentioned earlier, the game plays similarly to that of Space Harrier. The game itself is very short. You play through 4 on-rail shooter stages and face off against a boss at the end of each one. On the final level, you also do a boss rush in which you face off against the previous bosses in a gauntlet. Something of note regarding these boss battles is that they are all rehashes of boss fights from the Saturn games, and interestingly and similarly to the game's console counterparts, the game's camera also changes angles, so you get a side-on perspective in some of these fights. So it isn't all just Space Harrier after all. This game can be challenging and requires a lot of trial and error. Monsters materialise out of nowhere and fire one of either 2 projectiles at you. One which is indestructible and is just a big rock, the other which is a lava stone which can be destroyed. These 2 projectiles make up the whole enemy's arsenal. However, many of the enemies move erratically, making it harder for you to be able to target them. What makes this even more challenging is the fact that your health carries over to the next stage and isn't replenished enough. Apart from that, the bosses can deal out the pain in high amounts. Beating these bosses usually require a discovery of a pattern. Often during your first try or 2 fighting these things, you will likely die. With such a simple game like Panzer Dragoon Mini comes very simple controls. As expected, flying around requires the pushing of the D-pad. The A and B buttons fire little beams of power, and holding it lets you lock onto targets and shoot homing missiles at them. Whilst attacking is important, the key to playing this game is more about evasion than anything else, as everything is out to bloody kill you. The Game Gear visuals of this one are just like my moustache, crisp, clean and nice to look at. The bosses look particularly interesting and detailed. All the enemies represent the environment well too. Bloody millipedes erecting from the ground, birds soaring above you. There is enough to keep your eyes visually stimulated whilst playing on the small screen. The music in this one is also decent. There are the themes from both Panzer Dragoon and Panzer Dragoon's Y integrated into the game's music. It's great to hear themes from the classic 32-bit games playing on an 8-bit system, especially considering the Panzer Dragoon games offer some of the best game music of that era, or any period to be frank. To summarise, and be completely honest with you, although fun, there is nothing special about Panzer Dragoon Mini really. Space Harrier uses the same formula and does the same gameplay much better. However, the curiosity factor of playing a Panzer Dragoon game on an 8-bit system is a draw in itself. Panzer Dragoon Mini isn't a bad game, but it doesn't set the world on fire either. But it's worth playing for the novelty factor of playing a Sega Saturn franchise on the Game Gear. Cheerio! Behind me is one of the buildings that in 1780 America began to sever their umbilical cord with Mother England, just because they was all too stingy to pay their taxes. A few hundred years later, nothing has changed. Still no one wants to pay their bloody taxes. Hello? Debt collection here. You owe the British Empire taxes. Come out, I know you're home.